amount. Somebody was kidding with me earlier, said, "Oh, you're just saying that." No, I really, it's amazing. I mean, the molecular, the cellular detail about the conflict, the Palestine-Israeli conflict, I mean, it just makes my head spin, and it's really remarkable education I'm getting. I am an anthropologist, professor here at Syracuse University. I've been working for the last 30 years in Brazil on social movements, grassroots activism, mobilization, non-state actors, and these comments come out in part from that experience, and I'll try to comment a little bit about how. But the comments are unapologetically, sweepingly general, and I have some empirical material, but I hope that because the comments are so general, we'll all find a little bit of ourselves in there somewhere. That being said, I do have to say that when I am very grateful to the organizers, but when Catherine and Lou asked me to present, I immediately said, look, the title of this conference, this has to do with intractable conflicts. I don't have much to say about intractability, and however that's defined, you'll have to tell me if anything if I have to say is about intractable conflicts. I don't know that they are, my comments about that. And also, the kind of conflicts that we've been talking about, a lot of them have to do with or involve, some very bloody, violent, confrontations, and the ones that I'm talking about, violence really doesn't figure very centrally. So I said that to Catherine and Lou, and they said, no, you still should present, and I was so flattered that you still wanted me. I pretended that I was doing it grudgingly, but I was very honored, so I'm honored to be here. I hope that my comments have some value, and you'll have to tell me if they do. An early title of this was In Praise of Coercion. I'm hoping to rehabilitate coercion as an idea. So a key argument in the literature on collaboration is that for it to be successful, participants need to set aside coercive inducements. And by collaboration, which I define very broadly, I mean any process in which two or more parties articulate a common goal and seek to reach it through shared labor, dialogue, and problem solving. By coercion, I mean actions intended to influence a target by imposing upon that target some political, economic, or reputational cost. Types of coercive action include the threat and or exercise of exit, public criticism, public confrontation, and so on. And we can get into the details, but I do stipulate for the purposes of the argument that I'm making here that coercion, in order to be an effective ingredient of collaboration, needs to be disciplined by the following rules of thumb. First order nonviolence, though I do, in the way that I conceptualize this, accept jujitsu, that is, jujitsu use of power holders' violence against them. Conjunction with other tactics, that is, that coercion should be one of a repertoire, including institutional tactics, willingness to accept incremental improvements rather than all or nothing wins, proportionality, and treating parties as interlocutors with interests to be dealt with rather than enemies to be eliminated. And with those caveats, that may narrow us down so much that it may or may not have direct relevance to some of the conflicts that you all have direct interest in. But let's hope. Maybe in spite of that, there'll be some overlap. So coercion, defined this way, it is usually assumed, expresses mistrust and uncompromising self-interest, attitudes at odds with the good of the whole ethos that is supposed to guide collaboration.
From this point of view, the only time coercive action is constructive is early on in a process, to get parties to begin the collaborative process. During the process's later phases, goes this view, when the parties are busy discussing options, making decisions, and implementing agreements, coercive threats have no place. Now, this view may be more or less accurate in contexts in which the parties have roughly equal social power, or when inequalities of power are roughly counterbalanced by externally imposed constraints, such as judicial oversight, administrative review, and so on. In the absence of such constraints, however, the situations in which one of the parties either is or represents the interests of a party that possesses significantly less socio-structural power than the other party or parties, I'd like to suggest that the constructiveness of collaboration is enhanced, not by the less powerful party setting aside coercion, but by her, that is the less powerful party, making its use a continuous implied threat, and by her capacity to make good that threat through the occasional well-disciplined exercise of public coercion. From this point of view, coercion and collaboration in contexts of socio-structural inequality should be conceptualized, I suggest, not as alternatives to each other, nor as sequential stages, but as simultaneous parts of a single political ecosystem. And this is very rooted in my experience over the last 20-some years with housing rights struggles which constantly interface with, collaborate, problem solve with various agents of the state all the time, that they keep in reserve in their back pocket the threat of coercion, and that is very productive for the process. To make this argument, I will illustrate 4 ways, actually 3, because I don't have time for 4, and actually in an earlier version of this I had 10, but I will illustrate 3 ways, though I do not intend these to be exhaustive of the possibilities, through which the threat and disciplined exercise of coercion may contribute constructively to collaborative problem solving. So the first way is getting listened to attentively. Let's start with a fairly obvious point. Simply sitting down together at a table does not guarantee that parties will listen attentively to each other. And the problem is magnified when there is asymmetry of power between the parties at the table. What incentives does the more powerful party have, not just to make a show of listening, but to lean in and listen hard, with sustained, alert attention to what the weaker party has to say? The answer certainly is, in part, that the weaker party should offer positive incentives to the more powerful party, for example, by referring to the common values, vision of the future, and excellent things the parties can accomplish together. The problem is that if nothing but carrots are offered by the weaker party, the more powerful party is reminded of his advantage, and once again, his mind starts to wander. To assist the powerful party to not just make a show of listening, but to actually pay serious attention, the weaker party must also implicitly or explicitly threaten costs for not doing so. This is true not only at the start, but at every stage of the prospective collaboration. Here is an example. In 2008, and here we talk a state level, this is not a national, this is at the level of the state of Massachusetts. The state of Massachusetts, in order to assist in developing and implementing a statewide energy efficiency plan, appointed an Energy Efficiency Advisory Council. Most of the council was made up of state and local utilities, energy industries, and local governments. But as a gesture to low-income residents of the state also invited a representative of the Green Justice Coalition, a network of low-income neighborhood associations interested in the intersection of poverty and environmental issues. Early on, the Green Justice Coalition representative made a series of proposals to the council, including low-income caps on utility rates, subsidies to low-income residents' efficiency improvements, and training for new green jobs. These proposals were politely acknowledged in council discussions, but for 7 months, none found their way into draft recommendations. So, in the 7th month, the Green Justice Coalition representative did an interesting thing. He got the chair of the council to agree to provide each member on the council with a comment period. This seemed innocent enough. When it came time for the comment period of the Green Justice Coalition representative, the representative opened the doors and brought 100 low-income people into the meeting chamber to speak publicly and personally at the microphone of their fears of rising utility rates, the costs of meeting the new efficiency standards, and so on. Another 100 people were gathered in front of the building and held a news conference. The Green Justice Coalition organizer explained, quote, "Our goal today was simple. It is a latent threat." This is to the researcher. This was not a public statement. "Our goal today was simple. It is a latent threat that says we can do this. We would like you to do it with us, but we have the ability to do things that could be embarrassing to the council and to the Secretary of Energy. We have patiently offered proposals for 7 months. At meetings, the company reps smile, but then they are checking their BlackBerries. Nothing happens. Today, we have shown that we cannot be ignored." Within a week of this mobilization, the State Secretary of Energy had asked for a meeting with the Green Justice Coalition to, quote, unquote, hear their ideas. At the meeting, the Secretary said the following, "Look," he said, "everybody is supportive of your ideas. Everybody wants to do good. But how do we know it's going to work? We would be really supportive of figuring out some sort of pilot that shows that this works." And so, a good idea joined with the coercive threat and cautious exercise of coercion was turned into a plan. Throughout the process of working with the utilities on the pilot, the Green Justice Coalition remained always prepared to mobilize their constituency or go to the press when and if they saw the need. This stance kept everyone focused on the task at hand and generated a well-functioning set of community mobilization initiatives that established a community-run vertically integrated program providing outreach, training, and implementation services. Now, things could have unfolded less successfully. Nothing guarantees success. The point is that here, coercion and collaboration worked hand in hand. Process 2, preserving base legitimacy. Participants in collaborative processes who represent socially less powerful populations face a significant legitimacy challenge. They must strike a balance between working collaboratively at the table with representatives of more powerful interests, while at the same time sending a message to their constituents that they have not been co-opted. If they push their constituencies too hard to give up the threat of coercion, they run the risk of being seen as having lost their critical edge and having sold out. If their legitimacy as representatives weakens, this negatively affects the collaborative process, since the sustainability of any projects that emerge depends in part on the ability of representatives to persuade their constituencies to support them. On the other hand, if representatives mainly confront other parties at the table and refuse to consider compromise, the collaborative process is likely to end soon in rupture. The outcome of this balancing act is that representatives of socially less powerful constituencies have tended to rely in practice on the implicit and sometimes explicit understanding of other parties that some degree of coercive threat is necessary to maintain base legitimacy and therefore potential collaborative success. There are many examples of this phenomenon. I'll give one. The Immigration Policy Network, IPN, a coalition of 150 immigrant advocacy groups and nearly 1 million immigrant affiliates on the East Coast of the United States. The IPN's affiliate groups regularly mobilize thousands of immigrants in petition-writing drives, marches, letter-writing campaigns, tough public questioning at INS press conferences, critical editorial writing, and so on. At exactly the same time, representatives of the IPN regularly sit down with representatives of the INS to discuss and problem solve around budgeting, enforcement, and policy issues. While these discussions are always collegial and frequently productive, at no time does the INS ask the IPN to stop its support for the coercive tactics of its affiliates, for the simple reason that they know that this might weaken the IPN's claims to legitimately represent its base. In effect, the INS needs the IPM to stay the course and support its base's coercive tactics. As the direct voice of immigrants, Ospina and Sascarranza observe, the credibility of the network's representation of their constituents established their trustworthiness. In fact, the INS regional office, local office director has continuously sought out this body to communicate with because he realizes that we're representing the voices of his customers. He has never, ever asked us to give up confrontation as a tactic. Ospina and Sascarranza conclude that credibility was a form of political capital that allowed networks to engage in confrontation without being discounted as a collaborator. Finally, increasing civic capacity. The successful deployment of coercive tactics by the less socially powerful, that is, getting the powerful to change their behavior from fear of a threat, doesn't sound very pretty, but can in practice be a profoundly important contributor to constructive collaboration. The problem with keeping efforts to influence the behavior of a more powerful actor limited to pure persuasion or providing a carrot or benefit is that such efforts lack social clarity. Such efforts can easily be mistaken, both intersubjectively and subjectively, for compliance with and submission to the more powerful actor. By only ever offering carrots and persuasion, one runs the risk of being perceived and perceiving oneself as incapable of offering anything else. There is, in contrast, a certain crucial social clarity in the act of influencing the behavior of a more powerful actor via coercion or the threat of coercion. Witnessing a powerful actor alter his or her behavior as a result of one's use of pressure frees the less powerful actor from his or her subordinate role. Acting or threatening to act coercively is a culturally important moment of courage, of overcoming fear, a moment frequently symbolized or dramatized by the physical act of rising to one's feet. We need to recall, for example, the African Americans who stood up, walked, and boycotted the buses for a year in Montgomery, Alabama in 1956 to 57. The boycott, which we can never forget, was attacked at the time as coercion, which placed pressure on political leaders of Montgomery, generated a new sense of self for the boycotters. Martin Luther King wrote, "In Montgomery we walk in a new way. We hold our heads in a new way." Walking and holding one's head in a new way. This, I suggest, is an essential ingredient of civic capacity, of what in some societies is called citizenship. There is an important collective dimension at stake here. Like a communal rite of passage, the experience of facing a common risk and confronting it together in sacrifice deepens the social sentiments of interdependence and mutual care. Such sentiments cultivate the habits of mind and heart we associate with citizenship, such as the willingness to speak one's mind confidently in public meetings. The evidence from around the world is clear. People who have had the experience of taking a risk together by confronting power and who have seen their action affect the behavior of the powerful are changed forever. The experience nurtures a willingness to cultivate a range of civic capacities, including public speaking, an understanding of political rights and institutions, knowledge of relevant policy arenas, and sensitivity to the obstacles to social change. Last paragraph. The examples of this phenomenon are numerous. The Bangladeshi grassroots organization Nigeri Kori, for example, struggles for the rights of the landless in rural Bangladesh through threatening to coerce elected officials and public institutions. By 2005, 70% of Nigeri Kori members had participated in confrontational protests, revelatory documentaries, sit-ins, class action lawsuits, you name it. As Leila Mahmoud argues, it was precisely these activities that enabled Nigeri Kori members to be able to describe their constitutional rights. Those who had not participated in such actions could not. To interact effectively with officials from local administration, to help in the distribution of government programs, and to be sought out by municipal governments and other community members for advice. It is generally assumed that socially disadvantaged people who come to politics via confrontation are ill-equipped to participate in collaborative forums. Mahmoud found just the opposite. In Bangladeshi rural health councils, she discovered poor women who had cut their teeth, eye teeth, in Nigeri Kori's confrontational tactics were the most confident and best informed participants. The councils required careful discussion across a huge class divide. Members of Nigeri Kori landless groups, Mahmoud reports, had acquired the skills and capabilities for participation and were prepared to overcome communication gaps with professional people. They were often the most self-assured and articulate people in the room. It is important to note that the members of Nigeri Kori who participated in the collaborative forums with such effectiveness were also regularly involved in coercive action. Here, the two forms of action are not contradictory. They reinforce and complement each other. So, in conclusion, in this paper, I've outlined 3 pathways through which the threat and exercise of coercion may contribute constructively to collaboration. Clearly, these need to be operationalized further such that both scholar and strategist might specify with greater precision the social and political conditions that favor more or less constructively coercive threats and action. All I'm suggesting is that it's time to bring coercion back in. So, that's it.